Okay, this is a video that I wanted to make after I watched my last video, because in my last video I explained how to use masking to gain the maximum number of steps from black to your high values without losing pure white to pure black. So getting a maximum white on your print and getting a maximum black on your print, but still seeing all your steps. And I didn't want to leave you with the impression that that was a goal to shoot for when making fine black and white prints, because it really isn't. It's a good exercise, and it shows you how to mask transparencies as well as negatives to accomplish that. But it's not really a useful way to think. In order to think that in order to make a good print, you have to go out there and get all the detail that's available to you on the print. I'd have to refer you to my earlier videos, maybe number 2 of 14, where I explained that paper really responds to a specific density range on a negative, and it can only reproduce up to a visible density, paper density of about 1.8. 1.9, at that point it looks black, and even though the densitometer can distinguish deeper blacks, the human eye really can't see it that well. And this transparency on Electrochrome material, I had said that it goes to about 3.0 if you measure this on the densitometer. And if you refer to that second video of 14, I explained that's about 10 stops. And paper really can't reproduce that. You can't reproduce 10 stops of information. And then when you go outside to shoot, you're going to come across 15 stops or more. If you include the sun coming through clouds in your picture, you're going to cover more than 15 stops. So there's no way to get all that detail, from the detail in the lightest clouds to the deepest shadow underneath a car. Even though your eye can see detail, if you look at it long, there's no way the paper can do that. So I didn't want you to leave you with the impression that this is a lofty goal to get all the detail you can when you go out shooting. And so I wanted to address that and talk in practical terms. Although this lesson is a lot of the information that I've talked about, everything I've talked about, I'm using in this lesson. I'm not taking you to the darkroom. I've got all this film out here, and I'm going to try to show you what I did, because I picked a couple of transparencies to work from. And I had also said that in my first years of masking, over 50% of what I masked didn't work, even though I spent hours at it. And that's because I was masking with a formula. I was shooting for a specific highlight mask and a main mask, and I used filters to try to darken certain colors. And it took me years to come up with what I'm showing you today. So I'm going to try to go really slow. And of course you can always play the video again and again, but I don't want to make any mistakes, and I don't want to leave anything out. In a way, this encompasses a number of the trade secrets, if you will, that I've used in the darkroom. It was my edge in the photo lab business to be better than anyone else I ever came up against. Whenever that didn't happen often, but once in a while, you go up against another lab and the client would test you and give you the same original. And these are the things I did in order to get a different print. Not necessarily better, but even though it's better to you, the client may not agree. But anyway, this is how I worked. Many of the things that I did, I'm going to be showing you. And another thing I wanted to mention is, you can go back to the previous video and look at that, but when I lightened all this here and I darkened this, some of those steps ran into one another, and maybe 2 or 3 steps had the same gray patch, and that's because you can't reproduce 3.0 on reduce 3.0 onto paper and see everything. You may be able to not lose any steps, but the steps start to run into one another, and then you sacrifice local contrast. And local contrast, in my mind, is what makes a print sing, what makes a print successful versus something that looks kind of blah, you know. And even really good prints, sometimes you'll just see a mountain in the background and it'll just look flat. That part of the picture will look low in contrast, and that's a distraction for me. So that takes away from the effect of a print whenever I see lack of local contrast. So you have to take care to look at a print and isolate those areas where the viewer can appreciate the scene as strongly as possible. Detail that you choose to show in your print should be carefully chosen and placed so that you don't detract from the effect that you want to convey in your photograph. It's the best way to gain a sense of form and information. It translates to a feeling when you see the print that makes it successful. Like I said before, I was masking by rote, trying to use a formula, and I would say 50% or more of what I worked on wasn't really satisfying to me, especially given the amount of time I spent on the print. Clients didn't notice; they always liked the print, but to me, I could see how the print could be better, and that sense of what would make it better is what defined my masking technique. That's why I say that I learned masking by the seat of my pants. Some of the things I gained from learning to do dye transfer and so forth, but it really, every picture is different, so every picture requires a different formula, and I came up with a specific formula for 2 prints that I made, and I'm going to show you those prints at the end of this demonstration here, because I went through the trouble of making these. This time I made some 20 by 24s in the darkroom, which I'll end this lesson with. Okay, so I chose a couple of images that would have given me a problem if I went back to 1979, 1980 when I was doing masking. This is the kind of transparency that would give me a problem. So this is, I want to zoom in on this so you can see this. This is a nice transparency, but if you'll recall, in the previous video, I brought up a couple of, and the dark areas were just dark. You couldn't see anything here. So this is actually an overexposed transparency. It's not overexposed if you want to make a Chrome without masking. You can make a decent Chrome or R print from this. But this is not a maximum black. It's not nearly as black as this. And so the lack of local contrast is going to suffer if I translate that into black and white purity, or even a color print. If I was making a C print, it wouldn't have the contrast that you see here on the light box. And the other image that I chose to do was this, and this does have more contrast, but the separation of the sky and the cloud is going to be a challenge. And of course, this is dark now. This is going to be devoid of detail unless I do something extra. That wouldn't make a good chrome without masking, because this would all plug up. Now, there are two different, they're probably shot in the same area of China. This is shot by Annie Su. And Annie would go out early in the morning, early as 5 o'clock, get there by 6, climbing these mountains and just wait. And so it's a lot of effort to come back with Transparencies film from a trip that, you know, on the other side of the world, and so you want to do the print justice. And so I came up with two different ways. Now, keep in mind that I'm making a black and white name from this. So this is, again, referring back to the previous two videos that I made before. I'm going to be doing the same thing, but the masking is going to be different, okay? I'm going to zoom in just so that you can see these transparencies better, hopefully. Let's see how you do this. So I don't know if you can see the detail in the shadows there, but that's a close-up of the original Transparencies. Now, Stewart, you guys get off the chair. I'm giving a lecture here. And then I made a color print, which I will put up here. Now this is a color print. What I did was I just scanned the transparency and made, I kicked the camera. So I made these as references. And I tried to make this look as much like the Transparency as possible. So these are inkjets. So they were my reference in terms of what the Transparency looked like when I was in the darkroom. Okay, so let me back this up again. So, the first thing I did, let me talk about this one first, was making a highlight mask. And because this is so, there's no white here to speak of, I had to create a highlight mask. That's another thing. You'll notice there's more than one film here, so I had to double up on my highlight mask to build up the density so that I would have separation. I should take some of this away and show you what happens when I do that. So coming up with, see how light that is. So doubling up allows me to build up without, because I give so much exposure to get this density, other things are going to come out. So I did want this lightened because I knew that I would need local contrast here. So I gave more exposure down here on my highlight mask. And of course the highlight mask goes on top of the original now. And then I make my main mask. So now I'm able to allow more density coming through the transparency here. I'll take this away. And this is being dodged. So I'm adding density to the mountains here in this part here. Now, this is still flat. So that is a problem. And if I went back 30 years, I wouldn't know that it was a problem. But now with added experience, I know that's going to be a problem. And that was and I go through all this and I make a negative and I make a print and I look at it and I go, well, something's wrong, you know. So now that I know what's wrong, after I made this, I made this. Now this goes all the way down. Matter of fact, I also made this. I made two of them. So this with the highly masculine in place, it doesn't really matter because it's, I go all the way down to the midtones. I go all the way down to the blacks. Okay? Now, after this is dried, I no longer use this. I use this to make this. No, not this one. To make this one. So you can see this is coming out now. Now, I'm using this without the original, just to give me a neutral density mask of the lower of the midtones to the shadows. I use this to make this. This is essentially my black information. It goes even farther down. So now I'm adding contrast to the lower part of the grayscale. When you combine this two, you can see how that's going to affect this. Okay? It's going to, especially when I've already made this, it's going to dodge this and it's going to hold this. Okay, so what I do, because I don't want so many films, is I make this exposure, and don't forget it's all punched. It's all registered and punched. I make this exposure, I put it back in the box, and I leave it there. I switch to this, I zero in on this exposure, and I make this exposure, without the original, onto this exposure. So I'm double exposing this now to add density to this. Okay? And I can do the same thing with this. I can actually make a triple exposure. So then the mask comes out like this. So now I have a single mask that's been exposed, and you can see this is darker than that. So this is a solution I came up for this image, and that's given 30 years of experience of what to watch out for and what I want in the final print. I don't want it to look like this. Okay, I know that a black and white print like this is not going to work. It's going to look flat. I want a foreground, a midtone, a midground, and a background to separate for me. And this is how I'm doing it. Okay? So I know this is kind of complicated and there's a lot of steps, but there's reasons why I do each step. you can see how many films I go through. And there's bleaching involved, and it's hours and hours of work, but this is what I like to do. This happens to be what I'm good at. And it starts from the eye. It starts from feeling the print and knowing that this is what I need to do in order to make this print work. And then working backwards, I design my technique in masking, how to get there. Okay, like I said, I'll show you the final print later. Okay. Now, given this on top of this, I can make my neg. Okay? It doesn't look that great, but from the film's point of view, what the film responds to in terms of density range, it's my best guess. And I do have my interneg exposure from my previous lesson. I said, okay, if you remember, I gave a certain amount of exposure and processing to get a density range from here to there. And that's the exposure I would be using for this, except for the film base plus fog, and yep, calculate all that. It was probably 20-25% more exposure than what this told me from the last lesson. Then I made my negative, okay? And a negative looks like this. So now the negative is bigger. It's bigger than all this stuff. Now, here's a trick that I learned over the years. Try to put this away because it's very confusing with this film. Okay. So I made a negative, and this is the print. See, you can see this. This is the print from that negative. And it's a good print. You can see the detail here. Strong blacks. More contrast than this, right? But now I'm going to mask the negative because I can get a little bit more here. And that's more of a straightforward shadow mask. But, and this is one of the things I've been using for years, when I was in the lab business, almost always I made 8x10 negs, and so I had a vacuum easel that sucked the film down. The 8x10 punch I had was diagonal. It would punch in diagonal. You punch the film, put it down, suck it down, and then you make your exposure. Now you can make another exposure. If you punch the next film, it'll register. But because my 8x10 enlargers in storage, I'm doing everything 4x5 right now. So this is a 4x5 piece of glass with pins. So you can see there are pins. I got this from Warren Condit. He made this at the same time he made my punch system. And I also have pins. And so this is a sheet of Super Double X 4x5 film punched. And this goes into the holes like this. And it holds flat. Now I have a metal baseboard. So I put this on my baseboard. I put magnets all around it. So it's locked in place and it doesn't move. I focus my image and I make my exposure. And after I make, 12 seconds or whatever I use, I can process it. But at the same time, I can make a second exposure. I make this exposure. And it's punched. and I put it down here and I make a second exposure. This is probably 3-4 stops more exposure than that. So obviously this area is all burned out. It's all overexposed. But look at the separation I get in the shadows. I get really good detail here that I don't get here because of the added exposure. Now this is used to make my first stage mask, my black mask, if you will. And that's all it's used for. But because it's registered with this, it fits. I can then take my first stage mask, place it on this, and use this to get my shadow detail. And I've done this many times over the years. And you know, I was given a lot of original prints to copy in my day. And I had a 24 by 30 inch camera that opened in the back, and it was a process camera for copying. And I would put pins on the back of my camera and do the same thing. I'd shoot a perfectly good copy neg, and then I'd shoot another neg that was 4 stops, 3, half stops, 3.5, 4 stops, overexposed. It was useless for anything except recording the black, like this. And then I would mask with that technique, and I was able to make copy negs that, in many cases, my copy prints looked better than the originals they gave me to copy. Otherwise, you can't really get the detail out of the dark area. Sometimes you get such dense prints to copy. Just a little known fact is that Ansel Adams discovered a long time ago that when reproducing his prints, he had to make prints a little lighter. If he knew that it was going to be reproduced, he wouldn't make a gallery print. He wouldn't make a final print. He'd make a print that was a little bit lighter. The blacks weren't so heavy, because he knew that when you copied it, you'd gain the contrast, you gain contrast, and rather than give the copy person something difficult to work with, he gave him something a little bit lighter in the black areas, softer contrast, so that when he copied it, it would reproduce better. These are known as prints for reproduction only. Now, when I started printing color in the 70s, we were asked to make reproduction prints quite often, make color prints for reproduction. And they would gang these things up and strip them together and separate whole pages at one time. And so they had to be color matched and sized and everything. It took quite a bit of time, but we always made the best print we could. And we considered that a reproduction print. Well, it was wrong. It's not what a reproduction print really is. It's actually a print that's lower in contrast. It's not meant to be viewed as a final. It's only meant for reproduction. No one really understood this back in those days, and so everyone was making these really contrasty, heavy final prints that you would see in the gallery, and they're a bear to try to copy. I was getting that all. I was getting one job I got was done correctly. It was from the Ansel Adams estate. After Ansel passed away, they were doing a retrospective. They gave me a couple of prints to copy, and one was a signed print. It was a gallery print, but the other one was for reproduction, and it was the Aspens, a vertical, and I made these 5 foot by 7 foot prints for these bus shelters where you wait for buses, and they had these very nice Ansel Adams black and whites, which we printed. And I did this technique. I made 2 nays, and true story, when the person in charge of the Ansel Adams estate saw the prints in the street, he was very upset that someone had let out the original nay for this marketing piece, and my sales rep was standing there listening to this guy complain. And they said, no, we didn't give him an original. We just gave him a print like we gave everyone else. And he stood there and he says, that's from a copy? He couldn't believe all the detail that was. It actually looks better than the print I was asked to copy. Of course, the print I was asked to copy was a little low in contrast. Mine had the full range of black to white and detailed that wasn't lost. So, and this is how I did it. Okay, so instead of behind the camera now, I'm doing it in the enlarger. Okay, with this system. So then, from this, I made this. So now I've got this to dodge the black areas, and this will come out now to make the mask. Oh, yeah. And so you can see that this is kept clear. So now the blacks can really come out. This is all dodged. So all this is going to be lighter. This is a very good gradation. And so then I'm able to make, from this print, I made this print. Now, keep in mind that what I'm doing is slight. So I'm not after a huge difference. I just want more detail here. And I don't know if you can see it, but you'll be able to see it when I get to the big print. Okay? So that are all the steps I went through to make this neg, to place a mask on this neg, to make my print. Okay, so I think you can follow all this. Try not to leave anything out. I'll put this away now. And I'm going to go to the other image. Okay. The other image is this one. This one is more straightforward, except I had to get some separation here because I know that making a negative from this, you're going to run into some issues. Now, if you take this particular film, the Super XX, which I really like, and when Kodak discontinued Super XX, I bought a couple of cases because I didn't shoot much black and white. I still have a good amount of Super XX now, but nevertheless, Super XX, when you take it outside and you're shooting, let's say 10 stops, you've got, you know, this straight line of information out there that you can measure with your meter and see that this is one stop brighter than this, one stop brighter than this, and you record it. Now, a transparency is not linear. It comes with its own curve. It's already got a curve in it. So your shadow detail is all compressed already. This is not as clear as it was when Annie stood on that mountain and looked at this area. There was a lot more separation in reality than you're getting here, because when you take a linear subject and you photograph it, the film curve compresses the high values and the shadows, and the straight line portion, the middle part, is where you get the best separation. You get the so if I don't do something. If I just printed that on black and white film, it's going to be black, white. And you're going to have this, you're going to complicate you're going to compromise the image, because not only is your Super Double X has its own film curve that will compress the data, you're coming in with compressed data already. And that's why when Kodak devised the color internegative film, they tried to lift the detail in the shadows and soften the high value and still have an upkick for the whites. It was a very difficult film to make. Eventually Fuji made one, and even Agfa ventured into internegative film. Agfa never really marketed theirs. It was not, it's a complicated film to make. Fuji's was never as good as Kodak's, although it had more saturation. The curve shapes were never right. The green never quite matched the red, because you got 3 layers of information. You had, if you don't have the same film curves on all 3 layers of emulsion, you're never going to get a good grayscale. So that was a problem with Fuji and even Agfa. But Kodak quite often made very good internegative film that held a really nice grayscale, a really good gradation of tones. I have to mention that Kodak really had the best scientists working on this, and they never devised that particular technique for black and white film. So it was never a black and white internegative film. And so I came up with this to accommodate Transparencies from, because I knew I was going to go back to black and white. And turn this off here. My phone's buzzing. Okay, so I have to, if I want to make if I want to make a black and white print, then yeah, I can just do it. But if I want to make a fine black and white print, I have to go through all these steps. And even when I shoot original black and white films outside, I'll take into account, if I shoot it like this, I can mask it like this, and then I can get this. And I can place this particular tree against this background and separate it, because I know I can separate it with masking or whatever. So I always think in terms of masking, even when I'm not making black and white nakes from Transparencies, when I'm just shooting, whether it be a portrait or whatever. Although I have to admit, masking is a lot of work, and I don't mask everything. Can't afford to. I don't have that many years left in my life. Okay, so this is what I did. I made this from that. Now you have this separation in the sky. Again, I allowed this to go light. This is going to lighten this so that I have good separation between this mountain and this fog and this here. So I know that my final print's going to utilize that in a specific way. Another problem is all the dust. You can't make these without perfectly clean. I don't have a vacuum room where I work in a vacuum without any dust. So you have to watch out for dust and deal with it. So in this case, I had to spot my print. So when you make the print, you gotta go in there and bleach out these little tiny specks in the sky and go back in and spot it back in. That's all part of masking. Even when you do dye transfers, you have the same problems, and you have to bleach the dye and go back in and spot it. Katine was an excellent spotter. He told me that when he made dye transfers, most of the time was spent in spotting. It wasn't in making the dyes, it was in spotting. And he had 12 dyes to make. It was, he couldn't spot 12 prints in one day. He had to spread it out because You get tired of spot, and I know what he means. Okay, anyway, I made this from that. With this in place, then, I then made this. Okay, so now you can see that separation from this in the sky, from the mid area to the corners, and that was helped along by this highlight mask, which blocked this area. And of course, this is being dodged, and this is going to be allowed out. And this is the area of that. So from this, again, I made a very dark version of it to capture the black, and I made a good name. This was used to make this. This placed on this made the final mask, which is then placed on the original neg. And the sky has, you can see the separation here. And that little bit helps a lot. Don't forget, if you have a density on here of only 0.15, take it back, 0.15 above that, that's half a stop. You know, half a stop is a lot. You don't get that in a camera shooting outside easily, unless you bring a electronic flash and fill in the shadows to get more detail in the shadows. You don't get that kind of lifting of detail. This is more than 0.15. This is like at least 0.3. This is a whole stop above this. That means that if this got 10 seconds, this is being printed with only 5 seconds now. Going back to my first lessons about density range, and that's why everything ties together. If you watch my videos again and again and again and again, it'll save you 30 years, which is how long it took me to get here. So that's what I'm trying to give you guys. I'm trying to give you guys everything that I've learned in just, what, 12, 13, 14 hours at most. I mean, probably no more than 12 hours of videos. In those 12 hours, if you watch it and get everything I'm saying, it'll save you years of work. At least in the way that I work, which I don't claim to be the best. I mean, there's a lot of printers out there, a lot of photographers out there that do excellent work, that don't do what I do. But at least you know what I do. But you have to watch it again and again, because it's not so easy to just get. Okay, so this is the print unmasked, negative printed this, and this is masked. So you can see how this is brought up. Okay, but I don't lose my blacks. As a matter of fact, I can see detail here that's not here. This is lifted up, right? Okay. Yeah, and this here is one thing that you can use if you're working from Transparencies, because when you project, you can project a second film, you know, because you can get a black mask just from working from this, but then you have to work much harder to separate. This obviously has been easier to separate the blacks from the shadow detail. So that's the added nuance here in this technique. Now I'm going to bring the camera to over there and show you the color print versus the black and white print. Did I cover everything? Did I tell you everything I wanted to tell you? This might be my last video because I don't know what else to tell you guys. it's not all the technique that I learned, but this is a technique I use for these two prints, and this just shows you how I think. If you want to increase the contrast with masking, you can. If you want to decrease the contrast with masking, you can. Depending on where you go on this grayscale, you know, that's you're able to do this. Turn this off. Okay, so I'm going to take this and this and go over here. I don't want to turn the camera off because I don't have to edit. Like 2 views and one center hassle. Okay. So hopefully there's no glare on this side. Okay. Okay, so these are the two originals. And I tried to make the print look like the transparencies. So, okay, so let's start with this. This time I went in Darkroom, I took the time to enlarge them. Because I like these pictures. I don't really like this one that much. It looks kind of like a postcard. But I like the black and white. And I knew I would. So it was worth it to do all this work. Let's see. I gotta back up. Hopefully you can see this. These mountains are very different. Even this horizon here is very difficult to hold when you're making a black and white neg from a transparency and a black and white neg making this print. You'll notice that this is a lot deeper than that. This here, the local contrast is, you know, I measured this. This is about a 2.0 black. So it's got decent black. And the more I look at it, the more I like it. It's a very nice, peaceful image. I cropped this out, obviously. I didn't want this. This branch here to be too predominant. But so actually, I didn't allow this to go a maximum black. This actually, I don't know if you can see that here. Yeah. But, you know, when I mat it, I can always cover it with mat, but I think I like it. About an hour of spotting on the print. I made 3 of these. So it was a lot of time spotting because this obviously is very hard to keep clean. So if you have dust on the mask, you have to little tiny, you have to spot it with bleach to get it down to white and come back in on the print and blend it. So a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun to do. You can see, at least I can see, the detail in here. You can see all this in here, these deep areas that you see more detail here, obviously, but I didn't want it to be so flat. I wanted a good amount of black. Maybe I should come in here and see this sharp, if you can see. nothing can replace seeing an original black and white print. You really need to see, because it's more of a feeling than seeing. Again, when I was young and my father would bring me to see shows by Edward Weston, Ansel Adams, Win Bullock. These guys had these prints, and I would say out of 30, 40 prints, 10% of them would really move me. Well, I don't know, move is the right word. I mean, it would capture it would capture my attention, and I would stand there for an extra long period of time. Most of the prints I just walked by. I looked at it for 10, 15 seconds and I move on. But some of them I would just stop and look at it because it was perfect. I mean, there was no distractions. Everything was so clear. There wasn't like if you go into a print and you crop it like this and it holds up, it has good local contrast. No matter where you go, that's what makes a print work for me, because I would go up to these things and go up inches from it and look at it. But sometimes, even with Ansel Adams prints, the mountain was flat. I mean, it looked great from a distance, but when you zoomed in on it, that mountain lost contrast. Maybe, you know, the mist, the fog, or whatever in the background. I try to use masking to eliminate that, to gain the contrast, so that there's no distraction like that when I print. Yes, that's this one. And then fiber-based prints are pretty thick. And then this one. Okay. See if you can see that. Okay, so this one, again, a lot of spotting. This one was even more spotting than the other one. But you know, at this distance, I can't see the spotting. That's another thing. You have to get really close and make sure that the spotting is not a distraction. It just ruins a print if a spot stands out. I had a friend, a client, that was selling fine black and white prints. I think they were 11 by 14, and they were computer generated images that he ultimately went to fiber-based black and white paper, and he sold them for a few $100s. I mean, maybe $1,000. And these collectors would buy them and look at it with a magnifying glass and find the spotting and reject them if they saw any spotting. So you have to hide the spotting if you want to sell to collectors, which is kind of ridiculous. Anyway, a lot of detail now that it's not easily seen here. This is lighter than this. Okay, this whole thing here, just that little difference makes the print. It's a good print. I don't like the image as much as the other one, but it was a good example. Now you can see this. It goes. You can see the three-dimensional three-dimensional feeling of the fog going back. There's the horizon, very clear, and you have this puff of, you know. Again, I'll try to go closer. You have this separation here. Those are the things that are really hard to get when you're making a print one generation away from the original, when you're making a negative from a transparency. Those subtleties are really hard to get. So I'm zooming in here. Hopefully this is sharp enough for you to see. This camera isn't the best. You get too close, it goes out of focus. This camera was purchased for music. It has a very good microphone, so I use it to put YouTube videos of my friends playing guitar and music on it. It's not the best camera though for images. Okay, so that's that. Again, before and after. Okay. This almost looks black and white. I think it's kind of blue. Yeah. Okay. So that's it. I don't know what else to tell you guys. I don't know what the cat's jumping on this. It's too much work. Go back over here. See those guys down there. I guess I should make some closing remarks. Like I said, I might post more lessons, but you know, the only major thing I haven't covered is how to make separation negatives, how to use masking for color correction, but I don't think that's necessary. Not with the technology of scanning, and that's all taken care of now. I don't think anyone's interested in doing that. So this might be my last video. I don't know. I mean, someone asks me a question where a demonstration would be useful, I might do, but this is everything I know. And I realize that there are many very good printers out there that are not going to do this because they already know how to print, and they might have been printing for 20 years already. You know, why would they want to? But for you young guys who are just getting into film photography and want to do the absolute best, and you have a very clear vision of how you want to print this image, this negative you have, and maybe you went to Tibet and you're not going to be able to ever shoot this again, and you want to make the absolute best print you can. You can take this information I gave you, get the appropriate materials and the equipment, and start going for it. Now, it might take you 10 years. You might do it again and again, and as you get better at this, you'll do it again. And that's great, because how many times do you do things one time and get it right? We don't. I mean, life is, for the lack of a better word, it's filled with mistakes. They're not really mistakes, it's just experience. And the more experience you have, the better you can do. And you can do the same image, and I've done this. I've done the same image again and again and again, and until I get it to the point where, well, okay, now I'm done. And it's always rewarding. Confucius never wrote anything down. It was the 4 books of Confucius were written down by his students. So, but the very first book, the very first chapter of the first book says to put to use what you know. Isn't that delightful, or isn't that happiness, you know, to use what you know? And that's what this is about, is to use what you know. Because many of us don't get a chance to really practice, not what you preach, but what you know. To practice what you know will allow you to know it better and better and better, and there's just no end to the satisfaction. of that. The essence of Confucianism, one of the essences is to put to use what you know. And in case you're interested, the second line says, to be visited by a friend who has come from a far distance. Isn't that happiness? Doesn't that make you happy? Not the acquiring of things, of material goods, but the visit from an old friend who has come from a very long, you haven't seen in a long time. And I see this quite often with the older generation. I have had friends and relatives at 90 years old. When someone comes from another city and visits them, that makes them, they look forward to it. A week in advance, they're counting the days when their friend's coming, you know, because it's and they get together and they bring out old photographs and they look at it and say, remember, you know, we went to this school, and they're happy. That kind of happiness is different from buying a house, or, I mean, they don't care about that anymore. When you're 90 years old, you don't care about buying houses anymore, you know. And the last line is to live your life as you know you should, even though you're not famous, no one knows about you, and you're not disturbed. Isn't that the way of a gentleman? And that's the hardest part. Yeah. So in a way, you know, this is my claim to fame, putting this on YouTube and leading it for you guys. You know, I'm not going to be famous, I don't think. But anyway, that's my contribution to you guys. Try to watch the videos again and again. I can't stress that enough. I do have questions from people that watch my videos, and they need to watch it again and again, because there's some of the things they asked me, I covered in the videos. Almost everything they asked me has been covered. And very few of them actually get their hands wet and go out and they actually try. But once they try it, then they do it again and again. They have to go back and watch it again because they're missing something. But it's all there. Try to give you guys all the information. So, okay. Good luck. Film photography.